Silly Daddy's Chickens. Once upon a time, there was a silly daddy who lived in a small house with a small but lovely garden. The daddy had always wanted chickens, or hens as they should be called. He wanted chickens to lay eggs for him, to eat the grass, to eat the slugs, and to look nice. So of course the silly daddy got some chickens. He went to a chicken farmer who had dozens of chickens. White ones, brown ones, black ones, even spotted ones. The daddy got one white one, one black one, and one spotted one. He then brought the hens home and put them into their newly but poorly built chicken coop. Daddy had tried very hard to build a suitable home for his chickens, and barely managed. The hens stayed overnight in their chicken coop to get used to their new home. The next morning, Daddy opened the badly built door of the chicken coop. The hens came out slowly but surely to discover their new world. It was a pristine garden of green grass and precious plants that were all part of Daddy's silly fantasies. The three hens were instantly interested, especially in the grass. They started pecking at it, and they must have thought that it tasted very good, for they didn't stop pecking all day. Daddy was very happy with his new dream. It all worked according to plan, for one day. At first, Daddy was very careful to keep the chickens very clean, well fed and well watered. He only bought the very best chicken food for his hens, and always tried to keep their water clean. But the chickens had other ideas. They liked to play with their water dispenser. They also liked to scratch and throw about dirt and leaves. So as a result, their water dispenser was hardly ever clean. Daddy's dreams hadn't quite gone as planned. And the chickens didn't stop there. They loved to scratch everywhere, especially where they shouldn't, like around Daddy's precious plants. You see, chickens scratch the soil for tasty bugs, but they can also harm the roots of young plants. And that made Daddy very cross. He tried to find many ways to prevent the chickens from scratching around the base of his precious plants. He put cardboard around the plants, he put wood around the plants, he put stones around the plants, all to no avail. The persistent chickens always managed to scratch the plants and ruin them. Poor Daddy. The hens did lay eggs though, and not just any eggs, but the freshest and tastiest eggs that Daddy and his family had ever eaten. And that made him very happy. In the end, he worried less about the chickens slowly but surely destroying his garden. And the eggs weren't the only thing that made Daddy happy. He found another use for his chickens. Up until then, Daddy had composted food and garden scraps. But some things were difficult to compost and a shame to throw away, like cooked food, cheese, and butter. Keep that last one in mind for later. Daddy had read in a book that chickens could eat all kinds of stuff. They love leftover greens. They can eat bread and cook pasta, even cheese and meat. Chickens are omnivores after all. That means they can eat pretty much everything, but only in small quantities, of course, as we shall see. So the silly daddy started feeding the chickens all kinds of stuff. Garden scraps like cabbage and charred leaves, rather than me. And bits of old bread and cooked pasta and cooked rice. And yes, even pieces of cheese, fish and meat. And once he gave them an old piece of butter that didn't look so nice and had weird bits in it. He gave it to the chickens and they loved it. The butter was gone in an instant. And the daddy thought, wow, chickens really love butter. It must be good for them. Little did he know. One day before the start of the summer holidays, the fridge at Daddy's work was being cleared out. Daddy had told his friends at work that his chickens were amazing because they could eat everything. So whenever the fridge was being emptied, Daddy's friends asked him if he wanted to take all of the food home for his chickens. Most of the food seemed okay, and there was also a big pack of golden butter. He was excited about that big pack of golden butter and how his hens would love it. Then they would surely lay very tasty eggs for him. When he came home, the silly daddy went straight into the garden and gave the chickens the food scraps from work. And the golden butter, of course. They loved it. They went crazy over it. It didn't take long and the whole pound of butter was gone. The hens hadn't even looked at the other food scraps. The butter was so good. The daddy felt pretty good about himself and about giving his hens such nutritious food. It was early evening already, and soon the daddy would have to close the chicken coop, so Mr. Fox couldn't steal his chickens at night. The hens went into their coop by themselves as it got dark. They seemed happy and content. Daddy closed the door of the chicken coop and went to bed himself. The next morning, Daddy went out into the garden to open the chicken coop, so the hens could roam freely. As he went, he heard the chickens making a whole lot of commotion. Something must have upset them, and they were being very loud. So Daddy hurried to the coop and opened the door, and then he saw it. 3 brown hens. Not one white, one gray, and one spotted hen. No! 3 brown hens covered in, you might have guessed it, chicken poo. And not just any poo by the looks of it. Sticky, icky, brown diarrhea. Oh, it was a sight to behold. The 3 brown hens now rushed out of the coop. They had obviously spent all night pooing on each other. Inside the coop, the walls, the floor, and the inside of the doors were light brown now. Everything was covered in poo. Oh dear. The hens did not seem happy. Daddy got the garden hose, and as best he could, he tried to wash the chickens. They didn't seem to mind being splashed by the water. They usually try to avoid water, but this time they seemed relieved, not surprisingly. Then the daddy washed the chicken coop with the hose, and he noticed something. During this whole time, he had wondered what had given the chickens such explosive diarrhea. He had never seen anything like it. But what did he see amongst the foul, get it, smelling mess in the coop? Maybe you remember. It was gleaming morsels of golden butter. That day, the chickens didn't lay any delicious eggs. Neither the following day. But Daddy was lucky on the 3rd day. And he had learned his lesson about chickens and butter. But it was not quite the end of Silly Daddy's dreams. The end.